So this is a unique chance, and
so we are very happy to have here some prominent speakers from Lithuania,
who have been involved in the reform of the state-owned enterprises in Lithuania. And let me first introduce all the speakers, and then I will pass the floor to the first one. We are happy to have here Christian Kaas Mortensen, the president of the Baltic Institute of Corporate Governance. Also, he is joined by Marius Barish, who is an acting head of the Governance Center in the government of Lithuania. This is a government institution which is supervising in corporate governance within the state-owned enterprises. We also have attorney at law Yaroslav Hrydychak, who is also a commercial law reform expert. So without much further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Christian. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm actually quite proud and happy here to be here at the Ukraine Crisis Media Center. I follow you guys online, maybe not every day, but several times per week. And I'm actually very impressed with the active communication that you keep up. I'll make a brief statement, introduce my colleagues to the floor, and then we'll be happy to take any questions you might have. Communication as well as transparency is important for the road ahead for Ukraine, especially when it comes to state-owned enterprises. This morning we had a stakeholder discussion to engage the Ukrainian government on the efforts of reforming state-owned enterprises. State-owned enterprises are fundamentally important to the Ukrainian economy. They provide crucial service to industry and the public. The state-owned enterprises in Ukraine consist of approximately 4,000 companies developing up to 40% of GDP. Yet the control and oversight of these valuable assets are not at an international best practice level. In Ukraine, state-owned enterprises should set the tone at the top when it comes to transparency, accountability, business ethics, and anti-corruption efforts. When things go well, state-owned enterprises can provide a solid base for economic and social development, contribute significantly to state budgets, and be an important tool to achieve government policies. When things go wrong, they can be a crushing financial and political burden. From the Ukrainian government's perspective, maximizing state-owned enterprises' performance should be a goal of overriding importance. Seen from the perspective of being outside of Ukraine, your state-owned enterprises could appear politicized, having uneconomic decision-making, nepotism, corruption, and lack of controls and accountabilities, which are all counter to good governance. We therefore believe that the government needs to develop a reform plan to close the gap between current and best practice and better systemize its oversight of state-owned enterprises. We also believe that any reform plan is very unlikely to succeed without the highest level of political support. A survey of media articles from people like yourself suggests that the number of cases prosecuted in Ukraine for corruption in state-owned enterprises is very low. Nevertheless, much anecdotal evidence suggests there are corruption or at least very cozy business relationships. Some of the ways of doing this are guided public tenders, exclusivity agreements, related party transactions, use of intermediary, instructions to buy, and sponsorship arrangements. We therefore suggest reducing opportunity by building better controls, checks and balance, reducing desire by paying fair salaries to executives and recognizing them for good performance, and finally heightening investigative capacity and imposing serious consequences in the event of discovery. Thank you very much. And I will now give the word to my colleague Marius Barish from the government of Lithuania.
Thank you, Christian. I represent the Lithuanian government, specifically the Governance Coordination Center of State-Owned Enterprises. We are a coordinating unit whose aim is to monitor and analyze the state-owned enterprises, to give policy advice and analytical input to the government, to the ministries, to the minister's cabinet, in order to ensure that the government can be a strong and competent shareholder and implement the shareholders' duties in a way that ensures the best, most optimal results for all the people who are ultimately the ultimate shareholders of the companies. So I was almost since the beginning of the reform of state-owned enterprises in Lithuania, which started in 2010. The reform had several aspirations, including bringing more transparency and oversight to the sector, setting clear objectives for all the companies, setting competent boards and management teams in the companies, and separating commercial and non-commercial goals. But the first step we made, and I think that was a very wise decision, to start with transparency, and specifically with the aggregate report of state-owned enterprises, which brought a lot of attention. It started as a private initiative, but the government soon stepped in and took over the responsibility of publishing reports on all state-owned enterprises. So we started with the report, annual report in 2010, and now we're already finishing, and in a couple of weeks we'll have the 4th annual report on the sector. In addition, we are publishing quarterly reports, and I think it can be a very powerful tool for the government to have a public report that would allow the public, allow all parts of the government and all the local as well as international stakeholders to see very clearly what is the performance of all SOEs, what are the main weaknesses and challenges, and that helps to draw the roadmap for the next moves, and that task really surpassed our expectations, and we got a lot of attention from the European Commission, from the IMF, from all sorts of international press, such as Bloomberg and The Economist, and others, and it can be great to improve the country's image, to show that it is reform-minded, and also to put the right kind of pressure to move on, and then to make the subsequent steps in reforming the SOEs. So I think that's all from me, and now I give floor to Yaroslav.
Дякую, Marius.
Thank you, Marius. I will say that if our Maidan was a revolution on the street, a revolution of dignity, a reform of the system of corporate governance in on state-owned enterprises, that will be that necessary Maidan, which should happen in offices, and about which we have long discussions. I would like that to happen. There is some kind of a test for honesty of intentions of those who are called our government these days. God help us to achieve at least some results we can, like they have in Baltic countries, who for us post-Soviet jurisdiction can be a very good example from all points of view, and it's impossible to cover in couple of minutes main components of a reform, because the notion of this phenomena, the task is very big. But if to be brief and without any order, without priorities, I would like to say, as a result of successful reforms, should be defined by simple things. That is, that those dividends, the state and we will get what our state-owned enterprises make, and we are co-owners of those enterprises. What are the main institutions or legal changes required? That I would like to be laconic, and I would like to speak about the reform of institutional environment, which on behalf of the state is responsible for public property. And the best experience shows that there should be a certain body, public body, with the functions of a shareholder in those enterprises, public enterprises. But also there should be some function that can be played by key ministries, and that's why there should be a structure. We speak about shareholder societies and the work of boards or state enterprises or public enterprises as a mediator between the government as a shareholder and also the board, which does daily management. Ideally, we should come to such an approach when that traditional or post-Soviet vision of the supervising committee as a structure which is responsible for compliance, like a formalistic compliance with legislation, that should be broadened in addition to those functions which are important. That should be it should be added by the work of strategic governance and strategic governance management in general of an enterprise. In the end, as an important component, in addition to legislation, which is required, because we should reinterpret the function of the state property fund. That is just a mediator, which temporarily is responsible for the management with the goal of privatization. We should leave that practice, and we should set up a separate structure which would have a function of a shareholder, or we should change the function of the state property fund. Those are legal changes, but professionally, in a professional sense, there must be institute of independent directors in the context of public enterprise, like agents of the society, who would be members of supervising committees of those public enterprises. That is the way to that is a solution. That is an effort to find balances to what we have now. An ideal result will not achieve an ideal result. That is a long road, but we have to start one day, and the success will come. Thank you very much.
And Marius to all stand here, and we can get questions. Будь ласка, залишайся там, якщо ви, будь ласка, питання.
If you have a question, please, you can give your questions now, and just mention Lyudmila Olinik, National Office of the System, UNDP Habitat System. Tell me, please, Christian, this is the question for you. You, as the president of the Baltic Institute of Corporate Governance, what, in your opinion, what indicators of development do you have What did you learn during these years? Which indicators should be developed in Ukraine, especially in the framework of that agreement we are going to ratify? And also, what are what are your objections if you found such?
Because of course the translation. If I look back in the reform of state-owned enterprises we were involved with in Lithuania and in Latvia starting in 2009, 2010, the main problem was that these assets, these large state-owned enterprises, were out of the eyes, were out of sight of people. They don't understand it's part of our shared ownership. It's all the citizens who owns the state-owned enterprises. So the fact that there is no light on these very valuable assets which are supposed to generate service, supply of energy, supply of transport, and so on to all of you. The fact that they're out of the light is the worst problem. So in Baltic countries, what we managed to do was to put a big spotlight on them called transparency. Once the transparency started to happen, everything else happened as a trickle-down effect. Once transparency happened, there was a sunshine on the companies, everybody could see them, everybody could see what was good and what was bad. They automatically started to improve. That means they can attract more younger, more modern management who is much better at running the companies efficient. They become less politicized, and when all these things happen, it's much more hard to have corruption happening in the company. So for me, the most important thing is add transparency, add sunshine to all these companies, accountability, anti-corruption and efforts would automatically happen immediately afterwards.
Дякую, Christian.
Thank you very much, Christian. A question to Marius.
What do you think was a turning point in the entire reform? What was that your government has realized that had to change? Because apparently Lithuania has been already a member of the EU for quite a while, starting from 2004, and you only started the reform in 2010. So what is that trigger that prompted you to actually initiate change? And what do you think is required here in Ukraine to embark on the reform?
Well, I think it's a little bit unfortunate that all these kind of reforms are started during the crisis or after the crisis. So usually you need a crisis, a big shake-up to start thinking. So in Lithuania we had a very dramatic financial crisis. In the context of a global financial crisis, Lithuania was hit really hard in terms of loss of employment and loss of GDP and deteriorating public finances. So the government was forced to start thinking for new ways to improve the governance and to make sure that the state assets are really managed efficiently, and to look for ways to work smarter. And it was very quickly realized that we have these billions and billions of assets that that return to the shareholders, to the state, basically nothing. So this was a big motivation, and then once we brought this topic into the spotlight, into the public attention, it just had things had to start moving, because more and more questions were asked, and there was so much and such a widespread agreement that such a reform has to be implemented, and this is the right way to implement. And very soon all the major international stakeholders moved in and endorsed this reform.
Thanks. Ярославе, у мене питання до вас.
Yaroslav, I have a question to you. A question to Yaroslav.
Ті завдання, які зараз ставлять
Those tasks
даний проект,
of this project, to improve transparency of public-owned enterprises and to improve the management. You, as an expert on legislation, do we have legislation for that to take place, or we have gaps we need to fill, or do we have everything? We need just a political will as such, and also to make that report or overview of public enterprise. We need political will to introduce a little minor changes to our legislation. Valery Volkov, events of the week. I have a question to Yaroslav. Check. Tell me, please, the cost of the issue for Ukraine, or the value of the issue. How much will it cost to run such a reform? As the first step, and from the first step to the last one. Thank you very much for your question. The price of the question: 40% of GDP, national GDP, and the price of our services is 0, because I don't know how well my colleagues mentioned it, how clearly they mentioned. But the first stage of our work is we need to prepare the first overview of the status of public enterprises in Ukraine, because the priority for us is the speed also of such a product, and we wouldn't like to overburden the local bureaucracy with the necessity. We don't want them to postpone it. We would like to show how it looks like, how to do it, and we want to make them interested. So the structure of this report, that is the initiative of different people from the private sector, and there are people who are responsible for PR, for legal side, for audit, who are well trained to do that work. So to make such a report, making such a report will be free for our government. It's just our initiative. But then afterwards, even if the report will receive a positive feedback, and if it creates those preconditions, it will cause interest, and other steps may realization of a political will. How all of that will happen, I don't know. It's very difficult to calculate that.
Beautiful, excellent question. Yes, we are a non-profit NGO based in Lithuania. We're covering Baltic countries. We have received no money, no support to be here. We have spent our own money to travel here. What is really interesting is what happens if you don't. Because now Ukraine has such a beautiful opportunity to reform, to change, to improve, to become better. And you have the whole Western world rooting for you. You have us, you have the EU, you have the World Bank, IMF, everybody wants success for Ukraine as much as you yourself want. But if 12 months from now, nothing has changed, all this goodwill will disappear very, very fast. And over to the east, there's plenty of people hoping that you will fail. So the cost of not doing the reform is much more interesting to focus on than the cost of doing the reform.
And a very important question, Christian, about corruption in the Baltic states. Well, how can do you see the correlation between well, let's rephrase it. I mean, to put it very, very bluntly, how many prosecutions were initiated in the Baltic states with the reform of state-owned enterprises 4 or 5 years ago, basically where some of the officials, or actually those managers who ran state-owned enterprises, were implicated or compromised in a way while some reports were produced or maybe some other investigations were started. Because as you know, we just had a roundtable at the US Embassy earlier this morning, and one of the public officials from Ukraine said that there was not a single Ukrainian official who was indicted and basically jailed because of corruption. And I'm just curious what's the experience of the Baltic states.
Let me take the question even broader by paraphrasing what Vasil said. What are the implications for you if you fare bad in the report in Baltics?
Having been involved in this reform in Baltic states, we have worked a lot of transparency. So, for example, we published a report where we investigated every single state-owned enterprise in Lithuania, management changes. As you know, management changes is very politically appointed, so that they can be there to help their cronies in the political system. So we took every single state-owned enterprises in Lithuania and looked at who is the CEO of that company 20 years back in time. And then we made a personal profile of every person who had been CEO of every company for 20 years. What is their work history? What is their political affiliation? Where were they before and where were they after? And we published the whole enchilada and benchmarked executive management changes in these companies against the OECD. Now, in Baltic countries, when you do this, you are not threatened personally. You have no negative repercussions. I don't think this kind of reform is interesting in terms of putting people in prison. It takes too long, and by the time, you know, all these, let's say, EU embargo about 21 people who get their assets frozen, everybody has their money removed from the EU way before they get embargoed. It's irrelevant. What is important is to shut the door for corruption, that they can't steal anymore. Then those who are no longer able to steal will go somewhere else. Imprisonment, I don't find it to be an important topic. Stopping the corruption, increasing the transparency, and moving forward in life, that's important.
Елена Колобania, Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Thank you so much for coming here and bringing up this important issue, and thank you so much for the whole Lithuanian people and government for active support you provide to Ukraine on all the number of an array of issues, including political. My question is that if you can analyze the role of corporate governance in the scale of all economic reforms. So my understanding is that it's prerequisite for other more important probably reforms. So can you elaborate more on that, if it is the prerequisite, so for what sort of reforms?
What is first, chicken or egg? You know, it's impossible to say, and certainly I am not the expert on which is the most important thing. I think Ukraine is this unique situation that everything needs to be done yesterday. Nothing should be postponed until tomorrow. Everything must be done today and yesterday. We must have an urgent agenda of changing everything. So that means, you know, the constitution probably has to be changed, or we at least know which constitution is that we're actually following. The legal framework has to be changed. Everything has to be done. Some of the things which a country like Ukraine has to do is painful, which means, you know, pensioners will have less money to spend, energy tariffs will go up, and so on. The beautiful thing about reform of state-owned enterprises is that it's one of those who gives back quickly. So that means right now the companies are sitting on cash. And that cash, yeah, that might be dispersed not always perfectly correct. So once the government takes control of the assets, it also means the profit the company has at the end of the year might be paid out as dividends to the state budget. So it means, you know, we're talking percents of GDP. We're not talking micro money here. We're talking percents of GDP. And we're also talking, if you manage to put proper checks and balances in place, audit, IFRS and so on, it means actually that can you just prevent, 50% of the corruption? Ka-ching, this goes straight to the state budget. So this doesn't actually harm the individual pensioner or the worker, which means it's a much quicker and less, let's say, publicly harmful reform to start with.
That's a perfect answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us here at the Crisis Media Center, and we wish you a productive the rest of your stay in Kiev. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.